Matt Rojansky is director of the Wilson Center's Kennan Institute. Previously, he served as deputy director of the Russia and Eurasia Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Matt, welcome to Now. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, John.
I want to talk to you about an issue that has been very prominent in the U.S. election, the involvement of Russia and Vladimir Putin. First off, I was just coming off the vice presidential debate last night. I was struck by the fact that I can't remember a presidential election where a foreign leader was named so frequently as Vladimir Putin has been named in this election.
Absolutely right. In two senses. One, the degree to which Russia was a central topic in this vice presidential debate and in the election across the board is by far greater than any time since the Cold War. You saw Russia creeping in the discussion of Syria. You saw it in the domestic politics, right? Is Putin or Obama a stronger leader, right? This sort of yard sticking against Putin. And that brings me to the second point, which is the personality of Putin, the degree to which U.S.-Russia relations have been completely personalized. It's all about, is one leader going to be tough enough to handle the other leader, as if we don't have the underlying challenge of this dysfunctional U.S.-Russia relationship. Maybe it's too cute, but I like to remind people that if Vladimir Putin just disappeared tomorrow, we'd still have a really serious challenge to deal with in any leader in Moscow, because there are really underlying problems in the U.S.-Russia relationship.
So given all of this, are you suggesting we're spending too much time psychoanalyzing Vladimir Putin?
Without a doubt. I mean, first of all, I won't say that we're in a new Cold War. Some have made that argument. But there's no question that Cold War-style Kremlinology is back, right? This obsession with who's up and who's down inside the walls of the Kremlin, who's in Putin's inner circle. Can we reach out and touch that inner circle in terms of sanctions and pressure? Can we psychoanalyze Putin? It's almost to the point of studying liver spots. You know, is he sick? Why has he disappeared? What's his succession plan? At the end of the day, we're avoiding the hard problem. And the hard problem is that Russia, for 25 years, has been drifting in a direction that is actually less positive for U.S. interests than what Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan envisioned in the 1980s, which was to end the Cold War, but have a functional U.S.-Soviet and then, of course, U.S.-Russian relationship to manage the problems of European security. Instead, the message has been, hey, we're still on opposite sides of European security. And that, at the end of the day, John, that's at the core of the conflict that we see now, even when it plays out in the U.S. elections, in Syria, you know, globally on other issues. The core of it is about European security.
And I want to come back to that core in a minute. If you'll indulge me with one more question about the current set of circumstances in the election. What do you anticipate moving forward? Has this story peaked, or are we going to see Russian hacking attempts or other things going on straight through election day?
You've got to look, you know, the capabilities are there. Russia can continue to make absolutely as much trouble as it wants to make. Now, it's true that we have capabilities on our side. We may or may not be deploying them in terms of retaliation, in terms of deterrence. Exactly how that calculus works, it's a new calculus. It's not the same as nuclear deterrence used to be. It's not the same as conventional military deterrence. So I don't know exactly how that's going to work, and I don't know exactly what, you know, decisions have been made on our side. What I do know is that the Russian motivation will remain. The Russian motivation is very straightforward. They're not getting what they want on European security, so their voice in the process, their veto over Ukraine's NATO membership or Georgia's NATO membership, their so-called sphere of privilege influences, they're not getting any of those things that they claim to want. The United States says no. They're not getting relief from the sanctions and isolation policy, which has been hurting them economically as a result of their aggressive actions against Ukraine. So they're not getting what they want. Their incentive is to up the temperature, is to remind Americans that if we don't deal with them, if we don't negotiate with them, they can make our lives worse and they can damage our interests. They're striking at home in terms of the intervention in the elections, cyber hacking, damaging our credibility, the credibility of our democracy. They're also striking internationally, the intervention in Syria, creating or worsening a humanitarian crisis for which you saw both presidential campaigns now seem to be taking moral responsibility. We, America, have to do something. Well, in part, we have to do something because the Russians are exacerbating the problem.
So you put this in the context of a larger strategy. And so the question is this a constructive strategy? Will this lead to better U.S.-Russian relations in the long term, or is this just digging the hole deeper?
I think if you look at the sweep of, you know, Washington-Moscow interactions going back into the Cold War and through the post-Cold War period, there is always this sort of dangerous getting close to the edge, right? you don't get the type of serious dialogue where each side takes the other side seriously enough to accomplish something. And here's the key, is open to making concessions, is not coming to the table with maximalist positions on which they will not give an inch until you have had an unacceptably dangerous moment of crisis. So I would argue you would never have gotten the Helsinki negotiations and the Helsinki Final Act during the Cold War without the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Middle East wars and all these moments where we really seemed to come very close to a direct shooting war between Washington and Moscow, which would have literally ended human life on this planet. My concern is, how can we possibly risk a repetition of that degree of risk, right? Walking all the way up to the edge, looking over and saying, we probably don't want to go down that road. How can we possibly risk that when we know at the end of the day, neither side wants that, and we can even see the outlines of some of the deals, some of the compromises that could be struck on at least some of the interests, even if we won't agree on everything.
Is there any hope for internal opposition to Putin changing the scenario?
Yeah, of course there's hope. There's always hope. I will never give up hope that Russia is going to change in a direction that's better for its citizens, that's better for its relationships with Europe, with the United States. Of course it will, and I think in the longer run, by the way, it has, right? I mean, Vladimir Putin and the system in Russia is by no means perfect. It's not democratic, it's not free, and it certainly isn't pleasant for people who oppose him, of which there are still plenty. At the end of the day, it's a heck of a lot better than the worst that the Soviet system had to dish out. It's a heck of a lot better than the worst of the Tsarist system. I mean, Russia had slavery in the 19th century, just like we did.
How is it trending, though, in that regard?
It's trending in a broadly negative direction. On the other hand, the core social contract, and this is what Americans fail to understand by being preoccupied with Putin as Darth Vader, the core social contract still works, and that is, I make you rich, you stay out of politics. In relative terms, Russians are better off, let's say broadly speaking, in this decade than they have been in any decade in their previous history.
Final thought. Soon we will have an end to this Clinton-Trump election, to the relief of many observers. No matter who wins, what would your advice be to the new administration as far as its posture toward Russia and Vladimir Putin in particular?
So number one is think through a policy. Being tough is not a policy. So we have to get beyond what we heard in the vice presidential debate last night, which is both sides saying, we're prepared to be tough on Russia. That's great. You got to be tough when you got to be tough. Other times you're going to have to look for areas where we can strike agreements, right? What are those going to be? How do you define the two? How do you strike the balance between those two? That's a policy. That's how you begin to have a policy. The second thing is, you got to talk to him. George Kennan once said, I'm prepared to talk to the devil if he controls enough of the world to make it worth my while. And I think that should be the watchword for challenging countries, whether it's China, Russia, Iran, right? If there are important enough American interests at stake, we cannot treat dialogue as a reward for good behavior. Dialogue is a tool for getting what we want.
Matt Rojansky, as always, great insights into Russia. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, John.